project for this video is to remove bars from an image, and I'm going to supply you with the image so that you can follow along step by step. Now the first step will be opening up the image in Photoshop. So for me, I can just right click, do open with, and then I'm going to choose Photoshop, or you could just grab your image and drag it onto your canvas. Now the first step is always to duplicate our layer, and we do this just so that we're doing non-destructive editing and we can always go back and compare our final image to the original. Now we're going to grab our spot healing brush. If you right click, you can choose spot healing brush, and then there's a few other options in there. But for this project, we're only going to use the spot healing brush. And now this bar, I can go ahead and just drag my brush along this bar and watch it be removed. And now if your brush is the wrong size, you can come up here and choose your brush size. So I'm going to go ahead and make it a little bit smaller now. And then we'll look back at the image, and I'm going to go ahead and just continue removing these bars one at a time. And you just paint on whatever item that you want to be removed, and Photoshop will remove it for you. Now I notice as I'm doing this, there are some mistakes, like it's kind of painting in a bar or repeating items that I don't think it should be repeating. However, instead of getting too hung up on the problems, I'm going to just keep going forward with it, and then at the end, I'll go back and fix the ones that I don't like. And then since I made my brush smaller, I might have to brush across this entire bar and then come back. And I'm going to do it all without letting go, just so that Photoshop knows I want this entire piece removed. And now I'll let go. And now the whole bar is gone. And I'll continue brushing on the rest of these bars. Now the next thing I'm noticing is that my brush size is probably way too large. So I'm going to hit Control-Z, come up to my brush size, and make that smaller again. I think this will be better. And this time I just brushed over all the bars without letting go. When you paint it one bar at a time, sometimes Photoshop thinks that you want to fill the space with another bar because it sees that that's a repeating object and assumes that would be the best thing to fill it in with. So now let's go ahead and remove the shadow that was created by the bars. And again, by brushing it all in at once, I feel like I get a slightly better result. And now finally, we'll remove this last bar over on the left side. I feel like it's going to have more trouble here, but I'm going to try painting all of it in at once and hope that that works for us. Okay, now we have this one last final bar here. And it brought in some of her pants. And so I think this next stage, instead of just using the spot healing brush, because it doesn't know where it should be pulling information from, we're going to come up to the real healing brush. And the way that you use this is first you have to tell it where to pull data from. And you do that by holding down Alt and then clicking. So I'm going to hold Alt and I'll click further over here so we're not repeating data that's too close. And my brush is way too big, and so it's still pulling in color from her pants and stuff. So we're going to come up to our brush size and make it much smaller. Yeah, that should be better. So the downside to this is I can see there was a definite edge before I did the spot removal, and now that really sharp edge is gone on both sides. So what I'm going to do is come back to my original layer and duplicate it again. And then we're going to grab the lasso tool. And my goal is to just draw along that edge. And when you let go, it's going to reconnect to the point up above where you started. I'm now going to right click and do layer via copy. And so this layer over here is of just that sharp edge right here. So now if I combine that with this image up above, I have a sharp edge again. And we're going to do the same thing for this other side. However, if I just did my lasso tool right now, it's trying to grab data from this layer over here. And there is no data on that layer for that section. So we need to make sure that we select our background layer when we draw with our lasso. And it would actually help me see if I turn these top two layers off and I only grab it from the background layer because I'm looking for this edge right here. And so we have a second layer for the left edge, and now I'm going to turn those back on. And then the last thing I'll do is take our layer that has all the spot removal changes to it and bring it to the bottom. Now we can see doing that brought the bars back in, but it also brought these edges in. And if I grab my eraser tool, I should be able to erase the bar from there and still keep the edge. But first I'm going to bring my brush size a lot smaller. And then I'm going to make sure that we're selecting the correct layer. And now I'll go ahead and erase the bar from the image. So that's how you remove the bar, but you can still keep that sharp edge over here. And now we'll do the same for this side. And yet we still keep this sharp edge right here. And then one more piece is I'm going to grab my healing brush and I'm going to hold down Alt, select these buildings up here, and then draw them in to make it look a little less repetitive down on this section. And the next thing I want to do on this image is kind of separate her from the background. So all of these layers, I'm going to select them, right click and do merge. So now that's just one layer. And now I'll duplicate it. And my goal is to cut her out and then blur the background. So an easy way to do that is to come up to our selection tool, right click and do object selection. And now we're going to just draw a box around her and then the pillar that she's sitting on. And hopefully Photoshop will recognize what we're trying to cut out. Did a pretty good job. I'm going to go ahead and refine it by right-clicking and do the quick selection tool and make sure it's on plus, not minus. And once it's on plus, I can just draw in the parts that I want to add. So I'm going to add in her other leg, the pillar that she's sitting on, and then double check my lines. And if I want to fine tune it, I can also come up to the minus and then erase some of these parts that shouldn't be in it. But overall, I think it looks pretty good. So now we can right click on her and do layer via copy. And that's going to create this new layer over here of just her sitting on the pillar. Which means if I select the layer behind her and I add a blur filter, it's not going to affect her, it's only going to blur the layer that's behind her. So here's the little window that pops up, and I can preview it live to see how much blur I should put on. That's too much, that's probably not enough. So we'll do it right about there and hit OK. Now the problem with photoshopping is it can very quickly look too photoshopped. And if I do that, then it will look like she wasn't even there in the first place, that it'll just look like a composite photo. So you kind of have to be careful, but we're gonna keep photoshopping it just for the fun of it. So I'm going to merge my two layers here of her with the background and then duplicate it. And now I'm going to try to make her stand out from the background using my burn and dodge tools. So I can right click and first I'm going to select dodge. And instead of shadows, I'm going to do midtones. My brush size is good and exposure I'll leave on 30%. And then I'm just going to brush the parts that I want to lighten, which is pretty much all of her, just to make her stand out more. And I think I'll lighten up the shadows as well. So I'll come down to shadows and then brush on the same parts. And the opposite of that is I could use my burn tool and darken the background behind her. And so let me double check my settings. My brush size is probably fine. I'm going to bring down the highlights, and 5% is good because it makes a big difference pretty quick. So I'll just very lightly brush in all around her, and that's going to burn the background, which will help her stand out. So here's before and after with the dodge and burn. And then here's before and after with the original image. Now, personally, I think those bars are there, and this isn't something I would really Photoshop in real life. I just thought it'd be a good example for removing something that looks very difficult to remove and just showing you the steps and how I would go about it. And remember, I've included this image so you can follow along with this project, and it's safe to say that you are an expert at removing items from the background. The final step is just doing File, Save As, and saving your work. I'm going to go ahead and save it as a JPEG. And we are finished. You are now an expert at removing items from a photo. you.